social, inevitably social. We are also political in the sense that you don't come into a utopia. You know the meaning of utopia, which means nowhere. Thomas More, because it can never be realized. So none of us are really equal. Jefferson made this remarkable notion that all men are created equal. And he's a slave owner, you know that. And he was wondering whether these slaves are equal. And this may not be right, but Jefferson's one of my great heroes. And he was thinking, the Greeks mentioned that every human being is able to do geometry. You don't have to learn. Look at the form, you can do geometry. He tried on the slaves. Actually, many of us cannot do geography well. So he said, well, I'm not absolutely sure, are they human? This is incredible, right? So he's a racist. And yet he articulated this idea all human beings are equal, and that has become an important part of the American legacy. That's why someone like Martin Luther King will be able to really use this idea, say this American to be free, therefore the civil rights movement was based upon this idea, which is deeply rooted in American consciousness, even though it's not put into practice for a long time, even in the 60s. That's why we're going to celebrate the phenomenon that the blacks and whites couldn't go to the same coffee shop or to use the same toilet. It's a very complicated story. So human beings are complex. So the Confucians believe that you have to look at the human beings from many different perspectives. If you reduce, that's a reductionist model, if you reduce human being to one particular area of concern, you miss a lot. So it's a complex system. And in a complex system, the self is like a flowing stream. It's never an isolated individual. The self is not an island, but a flowing stream. So the self necessarily enters into communication with the family, with the community. We are members of the nation. And of course, we're part of the world. And the Confucians say it's not good enough simply to be a global citizen. You have to move beyond. You have to recognize the importance of animals, living beings, or even inanimate objects. So we have to move beyond what we call the anthropological world into nature as a whole. This is the vision of the self. So the self is a very expanded notion. So I characterize it as a broadening perspective. You move continuously in a dynamic way. In a concrete sense, is that you broaden not only your consciousness, but your actual physical contacts and so forth. And now it's almost the realization of Confucian dream. Using the computer, the internet, you can communicate with anyone in Russia, not yet in the moon, or in other kind of worlds, but you can communicate with everyone. But something which is absolutely un-Confucian or even anti-Confucian is that it can ignore people around you. On the one hand, you are totally global. On the other hand, you're so solipsistic. Your relationship is with your computer. Through the computer, you have friendship all over the world, and you don't have to deal with your neighbor, even someone who's in the same room. And you have a world that's you created. But there's no question about the fact that world is expensive. Now, the Confucian, you have a question?
Yeah, just a question about the reductionist model.
Sure.
So you said that if we understand the world from like two dimensions, like self, and community, nature, and pattern, right? Mm-hmm. Is that still reducing a very complex world? It's almost
into family.
Into just four things instead of what's the difference?
I haven't really stated the four things.
Right? Oh, okay, sorry.
One is the self. Okay, only the self. So the idea of the true self, rather than the belittled self, or the reductionist self, will have to go beyond your self-centeredness. So there's distinction between true self and a limited selfish self or self-centered self. Of course, we can afford to be self-centered, but that's not good enough. So you move beyond self-centeredness. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering at what point your commitments end, because if you imagine yourself in like a totalitarian society and you don't buy into what's going on around you, do you still have a commitment and responsibility to your society, or at that point can you make a selfish move and try to extricate yourself from the situation?
I think that's a very good point. And how about in democratic society? You think you're in love with everyone, or you extend to everyone because it's democratic?
No.
Certainly not. So the notion about the self that embodies certain kind of feeling, we call it. I make a distinction between feeling and emotion. If you call someone who is emotional, that's not necessarily a compliment, because the person may be temperamental. So you sometimes need to get away from the emotional person. But if the person has deep feeling, you feel comfortable. Now, if you have feeling, the feeling has to be cultivated. And feeling almost like, this is Buddhist and Confucian as well. Feeling is like the water that you'll be able to, you yourself, in terms of your feeling, can be considered as the different levels that you water take. In other words, hydraulic take. If your feeling is very strong, you flow beyond the family. Your feeling, if it's not very strong, it's difficult for you to flow beyond your closest friend. And almost like the hydraulic level is so low that it flows, there's a pot, and then you feel the pot and it cannot flow anymore. An accomplished person, from the Confucian point of view, not the sage, just an accomplished person has a great deal of feeling, can flow very far. But you have to flow gradually. That's the reason why the Confucians talk about humanity, highest value. It's differentiated love, not universal love, as in the Moist or in the Christian. Now, in the Christian tradition, universal love is not only you treat the stranger, your neighbor, the Samaritan idea, very well, but you should respect and treat every human being. You should care for every human being. And this is also tolerance. And you respond to maliciousness with kindness. If someone hits you on the left, you let him hit on the right. Now, this is an interesting question that Confucius dealt with. Someone said, it should be very good to repay maliciousness with kindness. Confucius asked the question, how are you going to repay kindness? And the student became a little bit puzzled. There must be a difference between maliciousness and kindness. How do you respond? So the responsiveness is important. Confucius' response simply is to repay kindness with kindness. Repay maliciousness with justice. If someone doesn't treat you well, you don't just allow the person to humiliate you. You have your own dignity. Right? So that's differentiating. You have to admit that your emotional intensity to the people close to you, like your mother, is probably very different from your emotional intensity towards a stranger. Not only a stranger of your own group, but a stranger not even in your country, but a stranger who subscribes to totally different value systems. It's very difficult. It has to be differentiated. So the art is go beyond the self and to relate to others truthfully to your feeling. If it force you to do something, not only the other person will not get it, you suffer yourself. So you need to move beyond not only yourself, but your family relationships. Some people say Confucian ethics focus on the family. They cannot deal with strangers very well. Then you confuse Confucian ethics with mafia ethics. Now you go beyond nepotism, but you also go beyond parochialism. Only your own area. You see it at Harvard, we try to mix